What is going on, investors? I'm back again. Welcome back to our weekend wrap up of the FAANG stocks plus Microsoft and Tesla. A lot of news this week. We'll jump into that. Now, on tap, we've got earnings coming up next week. We've got Netflix, we've got Tesla, Amazon's on the 26th, Microsoft's on the 27th, Apple's on the 29th, Facebook's on the 29th, and Google's on October 29th. So expect a big day of videos then. But really soon, we've got Netflix and Tesla on tap. So that should be exciting. Be on the lookout for those videos next week. So Facebook didn't do a whole lot this week, basically flat on the week in the after hours, selling off a little bit. Facebook's been in the news along with the other social media stocks. I believe they're set to go to Capitol Hill and testify, or maybe testify via Zoom or video conference. But there was this story on the vice president and the son, and this took kind of a life of its own. It was reported in a major newspaper, the New York Post, and then Facebook and Twitter started to, I don't know what the proper word is here, but maybe censor it or not allow it to be shared as often or maybe as freely on its platform. And look, I don't know. Well, I didn't read this New York Post story. I don't know enough of the background in this situation. I just know this is going to cause these companies tons and tons of headaches. This is going to cause them lots of headaches. And so we'll see what happens. I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. This type of story, this type of situation, I think it's going to get these companies in lots of trouble. Whether or not it has an impact on the stock, I don't know. I just know this is probably a risk going forward. Amazon also had a big week, had its Prime Day. It kept getting delayed. I don't know if a lot of consumers necessarily knew when it was. The stock didn't do a whole lot this week. These, like I said in the beginning, these stocks are probably pretty much in a holding pattern until we get to earnings. Now, Amazon did not note in its Prime Day recap that it was the biggest day ever. It had done that, I think, the last 2 years or so. And so they actually did it from 2016 to 2019. They analyzed the day as its biggest day ever. Today, they only recognize Prime Day as a record setting. So I don't think it was as impactful. We'll see going forward. The next few months is obviously big for Amazon in the fourth quarter, and with the holiday buying season, with a lot of stores being closed or kind of limited, or people not wanting to venture out in the store, will likely be a big time for Amazon. How much of it's priced into the stock remains to be seen. We'll see what happens there. Apple also had a big news week with the release of their new iPhones, or the announcement of them. Had a week where it kind of traded up on the news and kind of sold off and was flat, but you had this big announcement of the new iPhones, the new HomePod Mini, which was $99, has all these phones. Now, as a buyer, I'm on like iPhone 6 or something, so I'm going to buy one of these phones, but they're all releasing at different times. You have some that are shipping in October, some that are shipping in November, some are shipping, a lot of different times. So a little bit confusing in that sense, but I'm sure most people will be looking to buy this phone if they're in the market for that. Netflix had a flat week, almost dead flat, peaked up a little bit, but was flat, stayed out of the news, isn't in the crosshairs of the social media stocks and things like that. One thing that was interesting with Netflix is they're ending these free trials. I saw some chatter that Netflix might have been peaking, at least here in the United States, in terms of how many customers it's going to, like, if you haven't subscribed to Netflix by now, are you really going to do that? And, in large numbers and numbers that are going to move this stock, I would argue that's probably true. And so we'll see what happens with Netflix. Where's their next leg of growth going to come from? I think that's a great question. Obviously, they have pretty low churn and they have a lot of customers obviously already, but where's the next leg of growth coming from Netflix? I think that's a good answer. Google also relatively flat on the week. They've got tons of stuff going on. They're still trying to finalize the deal with Fitbit. They've got international governments kind of trying to get after them. They're in the crosshairs of governments around the world. I think that's also why this stock, you see year to date up 16%, but that's not big considering what some of these other stocks have been up. So Google's kind of an interesting position. So now we see here that the feds are considering forcing allowing Google to sell Chrome as a part of its ad business. So it'll be interesting to see. The election, I think, will have a big impact. The division, whether the Senate and the House of Representatives stays divided or gets aligned behind one party, I think that's going to have a big impact on these stocks. And look, I don't think it doesn't matter. I think either way, I think these companies are going to be in the crosshairs of politicians because, number one, they have lots of money and they are willing to probably give lots of money to stay out of those crosshairs. So both sides are going to show interest in them. And there's also, both sides have their gripes with Google and Facebook and Twitter. They tend to agree on very little, but I think there is some agreements that these big tech companies are in the crosshair. So we'll see what happens. Now, Microsoft's kind of avoiding all of that. The stock is hovering in this 220 range. It kind of stayed there all week. Not a lot of news. Like I said, I think on a previous video, I think the next 12 months are going to be big in the video game realm for Microsoft. Obviously, their legacy products like Word and Excel and things like that are doing great. Their cloud business doing well as well. But you've got a big release of the Xbox and video games surrounding Microsoft this next year. I think that's going to be a good year for Microsoft. Tesla, lots of news this week, relatively flat on the week in terms of performance as well. I have an interesting video on tap for Tesla. I don't know if I'm going to be able to finish it this weekend. There's some production work that I'm going to do in it. Hopefully next week I'll have an interesting video on Tesla, and it's surrounding, I'll give you a little teaser, surrounding the pricing of their cars. We see here that Tesla responds to this Lucid Air company, which is another EV startup, led by a former Tesla executive. So they actually cut the Model S price twice this week. So I thought that was interesting. And I thought it was really interesting the price that Elon Musk chose to drop the price of the Model S to $69,420, which was the price of those shorts that he sold. I actually bought my brother a pair. And of course, I bought them a few months ago and the shipping on those has been delayed in typical Tesla fashion. But so they've dropping the price. This was a $75,000 to $72,000 car. Now it's a $69,420. I guess that would likely be for an entry-level model, but with all this electric vehicle, startups and vehicles on the road, it's putting downward pressure on Tesla price. Now, I think there's going to be some ways Tesla's going to be able to squeeze more out of this out of its customers, a la like Apple. If you see the stuff that Apple has done, okay, they're charging the same price for their phones as they did last year and maybe potentially the year before, but they're squeezing more out of customers. And I think Tesla's going to be able to do that. Again, I don't want to give away all the stuff that I'm going to be talking about in a video here in the future. So a $2 trillion market cap predicted for Tesla as well. Ron Barron says they first started covering the company when they're at 40 billion. Now they're at 400 billion, and he sees a $1 to $2 trillion market cap for Tesla in the future. Obviously, I think that would roll in not just making cars, but I think their energy business as well probably has some potential there as well. Obviously, if you're long Tesla, you like hearing stuff like that. Now, let's jump into the charts like we always do. Facebook hovering right on this light blue line, which is the 50-day moving averages. I do not touch any of these trend lines. You see how well they've been in place. I've been saying for a while now, several weeks now, that these stocks are likely going to be trading in a range. It got to the upper end of the range here with Facebook, but then came back. We're right in the middle of this range. Not super attractive I think you could trade these stocks if you want to swing trade these, which I did this week with Apple. But, if you want to go long these stocks, with the regulatory pressures overhead, the election and the kind of the weird stuff that's going on, especially with Facebook, I'm talking about here in particular, I'd probably wait on this one. Again, we're right in the middle of a range with Facebook. I think I'd be excited about a 247, 250 price target somewhere down in here. Although we've got this big gap right here. If it happened to blow past that, you'd be down into 235 range. Apple also trading in a range, but it back tested our long-term trend line. So this long-term trend line has been in place. We kind of came down here at the lows of March, and it came up through, and it was a perfect trend line. And then finally it broke, but then earnings and split, and then boom, we busted above it. Then once we broke down below it, now it's acting as resistance, and we back tested it almost perfectly. Like I thought, I think on the last video, I thought that we had a shot at doing that. So we came came up here, hit its head on it, and now we're kind of resting right on this 50-day moving average. I expect that probably be the case here going forward. Amazon also not quite getting to a full back test of its long-term trend line. This long-term trend line also in place. We didn't quite get back there, so that's not a great sign. So this stock, failed in its back test, didn't get up close to, it got close to the all-time highs, but didn't get back to them and kind of failed back down to this 50-day moving average. Again, in our box here where we're kind of expecting these stocks to wave out. Now, if you're trying to accumulate, you've got a really long-term 10, 15, 20 year, when these stocks trade sideways, it's not a bad time to accumulate. I don't want to make it seem like that. Netflix. So Netflix also waving out, but like we said, it would bust up above these waves and kind of retest these highs. We've got like a triple top here, 1, 2, and then we've got a 3 here. Could be a cup and handle formation forming here as well. I don't know exactly what would surge Netflix to the upside. Obviously, they have earnings next week, and so that could surge it up. So I think this stock is probably going to go one way or another after earnings. I don't necessarily see it hovering right here. I see if we have good earnings, things look good. The subs look good. They made a lot of money. They're filming new shows. Then I could see this retesting these all-time highs that are up at the 570. If it doesn't, I think we could come back down closer to this range down here, which is a relatively wide range between 515 and call it 470, somewhere in this range. Now, Netflix is doing these big swings. So if you're in this stock, just be expecting to stomach a little bit larger swing, since that's kind of what's happening here with Netflix. Google. Now, we said last week in the short term, I actually had a really good comment. I said, on a video prior that I didn't see a lot of, a catalyst going forward for Google. That was from a fundamental perspective, with the ad business kind of being in a holding pattern without a lot of travel and things like that. I think when Google reports here in a week or two, I think we're going to be expecting about an inline result with that. But the chart looked darn good. We were locked in this short-term uptrend, and I just extended this line. It came to the top end of this range. Take a look at this. We put these lines. People think I just draw these lines in randomly. No, but this line in here was a pretty good line in the sand, pretty good overhead resistance. Now, it's going to provide some overhead resistance right at that 1585-ish range. If it happens to break over that during earnings, then yes, I think you could push up here. Not necessarily the all-time highs are all the way up here at 1720. I don't necessarily see that happening, but we've got a short-term, uptrend here. If earnings disappoint, the government regulation and them having to sell off businesses, that could force the stock down. I think we could trade inside this box. I think we're still inside a box here until further notice between 1580 and 1400. I know it's a pretty wide range, but it's a pretty expensive stock. So I'd expect that with Google. Again, we also have a long-term trend line here, but we haven't even come close to back testing against that like we did with Apple. So we'll see if that is something that could potentially happen. If this stock breaks up, this overhead trend line will provide some resistance on the way up as well. Microsoft, as you see here, we were in a short-term uptrend into last week. That trend continued. It actually did a really nice bullish kind of bust up above our upper little level here at 216. Now we're up in this 220. Again, Microsoft is reporting very soon, the 27th, so about 2 weeks away. So, we'll see what happens with Microsoft. Again, they are kind of flying away from all this government regulation. They had their bout with that for a decade or so with their products. And so now they're just kind of skirting away from that. So that could be a good trend with Microsoft. We haven't been able to push back up into our all-time highs, but that is within reach. It wouldn't surprise me with a semi-decent to good earnings report. Microsoft could retest these all-time highs in the 230s. The stock could easily gap up into that range. Now, finally, Tesla. Tesla is waving out very nicely. Tesla's almost in the kind of this perfect wave formation right here. We've kind of stayed above it here. We formed a nice little uptrend here from last week, and we've kind of continued it. We've kind of flattened out a little bit here, but we broke above kind of an upper trend line here at 448. The stock's just, doesn't know what it wants to do. Does it want to come up here? Obviously, there's some selling pressures. Sellers come in right at this level. You see here that, sellers came in here here, sellers came in here, sellers stepped in just a little bit here. So we'll see what happens. I think in the shorter term, again, this moving average has proved to be a good little area of support, right? If it happens very soon, the 405, later in the week, maybe 415, 410, we'll see what happens. Again, Tesla is reporting earnings on the 21st. That's one that's going to be very closely monitored, although they kind of preview it a little bit when they give vehicle sales numbers. So we'll see what happens in the future. But again, keep your eye on all these stocks with Netflix and Tesla and Amazon reporting very soon. And then finally, Microsoft, Apple, Facebook, and Google reporting just the week after as well. So big week of earnings coming next week. Lots of videos coming your way. Consider hitting that subscribe button if you haven't already. Leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about these stocks, and maybe consider hitting that like button as well. And maybe sharing our channel with a friend would also be an awesome thing that you could do for us. Thanks for tuning in. More stuff coming. Good luck with your investments.